It wasn't supposed to end like this. 7 years of marriage, countless late nights spent dreaming of the future, and 2 kids. Our boys, ages 4 and 6. Susie and I had built a life together, or so I thought. She was my rock, my safe harbor, and the mother of my children. We dreamed of retiring early, traveling the world, and growing old on a porch swing somewhere peaceful. But life doesn't follow scripts, does it? 3 months ago, things were normal. I worked long hours in upper management at a tech company while Susie handled finances in the accounting department of a small firm. She had her routines, drop-offs at daycare, meal prep, and endless games of hide-and-seek with the kids. I thought we were in sync. We weren't the kind of couple who fought much. Sure, we bickered over the thermostat or whose turn it was to take the trash out, but nothing major. And when bedtime came, we always found our way back to each other. Sometimes with laughter, sometimes with touch. Then her company hired someone new. And who smoked like a chimney, barked orders at her husband, and carried herself like she owned the world. I didn't like her. I didn't like her husband, Paul, either. A drunk who apologized for spilling his own beer like a scolded child. But Susie adored Anne, maybe because Anne had boys the same age as ours. Suddenly, our weekends became joint barbecues and playdates. It wasn't long before Wednesday nights turned into girls' nights. With Susie coming home later and later, the first couple of weeks it didn't bother me. Susie had always been outgoing, and she deserved her fun. But the late nights stretched into early mornings. She said the time got away from her, and she needed to shower because Anne smoked. Then I noticed the changes. How she stopped initiating closeness with me on those nights. How her eyes avoided mine when I asked about her evenings. Last Wednesday, I finally checked her clothes. They did smell like smoke, but her underwear was missing from the hamper. I found them in the shower, freshly washed. That's when I couldn't shake the nagging thought. Something wasn't adding up, but I told myself I was overthinking things. And then there was Paul. He was drunk as usual at one of those joint barbecues when he said something that stuck with me. Let your wife go out every week with Anne. What do you think they're doing? Girl talk till midnight. It wasn't just the words. It was the smirk he wore. Like he knew something I didn't. I brushed it off, but the seed was planted. And seeds have a way of growing, even in the darkest corners of your mind. The words Paul muttered that night dug into me like a splinter. I'd laughed it off in the moment, sure. What else could I do? But later, when Susie was tucking the boys into bed, I sat in my man cave nursing a beer, replaying the scene over and over. What the hell did he mean by that? I muttered to no one. Maybe it was the alcohol talking, or maybe he was just bitter about his own situation. Still, it was hard to ignore the way his eyes gleamed, like he held a secret too heavy to carry alone. I wanted to confront Susie, but I didn't have the guts. What was I supposed to say? Hey babe, your creepy drunk friend made a joke about you cheating. Any truth to it? It sounded ridiculous. Instead, I stuffed the doubt into a box in my mind and locked it tight. But the box wasn't sealed. It leaked questions into every quiet moment. Why was she staying out later and later? Why was she suddenly showering as soon as she got home? And where the hell were her panties? By the next Wednesday, the questions had festered into an itch I couldn't scratch. I decided to take a half day at work, telling my boss I needed to handle a family matter. At 6 p.m., I parked my car a block away from our house, pretending to leave for my late meeting. Instead, I sat in the shadows, waiting. The kids were with my parents, and Susie was dressed to kill. Tight jeans, heels, and the red blouse I always loved on her. Girls' night, she said, kissing me lightly on the cheek before she hopped into her car and drove off. I followed her. I know it sounds crazy, but I couldn't stop myself. She drove across town to a cozy little bistro tucked away on a side street. Not the kind of place for a wild girl's night, but maybe I was reading too much into it. I stayed in my car, watching her from a distance as she walked inside. A minute later, and joined her, laughing loudly as she pulled out a chair. They seemed to settle in, ordering drinks and chatting animatedly. Relief washed over me like a warm tide. Maybe Paul was full of crap after all. I was ready to leave when something caught my eye. A third person joined their table, a man. Tall, clean-cut, with a rugged charm that screamed, blogger or starving artist. He wasn't Anne's husband. That much was clear. And didn't look twice at him. But Susie? She lit up like a Christmas tree. She leaned in close, her hand brushing his arm as she laughed at something he said. My stomach twisted. Probably just a friend from work. I whispered to myself, though my voice lacked conviction. I watched them for another hour, waiting for the moment I'd catch her doing something that would shatter my world completely. But she didn't. No stolen kisses, no lingering touches, nothing to confirm my worst fears. Still, I couldn't unsee the way she looked at him, like he was the most interesting person in the room. When she finally left, she didn't come straight home. Instead, she made a stop at Anne's house. I followed her there, too, feeling like a fool but unable to turn back. She stayed for 20 minutes, then drove home, parking in our driveway as if nothing had happened. By the time I got inside, she was already in the shower. How was your night? I called out. Good. Just the usual, she replied, her voice too bright. I sat on the edge of our bed, her phone buzzing beside me with a message from Anne. You nailed it tonight, babe. He's hooked. My heart stopped. Who was hooked? What did she mean by nailed it? The doubt that had whispered in the back of my mind now screamed like a siren. Susie came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel, her damp hair clinging to her neck. What's wrong? She asked, her smile fading when she saw my face. Nothing? I lied, slipping her phone back onto the nightstand. But inside I was anything but fine. Whatever was going on, I knew one thing. I wasn't imagining it. Something was happening and it wasn't good. The man at the bistro, the text message, the late nights, they all painted a picture I didn't want to see. But now that the brushstrokes had started, I couldn't look away. The next morning, I couldn't get Anne's text out of my head. You nailed it tonight, babe. He's hooked. Those words burned like acid, eating away at any lingering hope that my suspicions were misplaced. But I still didn't know enough. I couldn't accuse Susie based on a text I didn't fully understand. Was she playing some office prank? Was it about that guy from last night? Or worse, was she hiding something far more damaging? At breakfast, Susie was the picture of domestic bliss. She wore my favorite flannel pajama pants and poured coffee for both of us, humming as she flipped pancakes. The boys laughed as she teased them about syrup drips on their shirts. Watching her, it felt almost impossible to reconcile this version of my wife with the one I'd seen at the bistro the night before. But that text wouldn't let me rest. I might head out for a while later, Susie said casually, handing me my coffee. Anne's got a project she needs help with. You don't mind keeping an eye on the boys, do you? I nearly choked on my drink. Another outing? Another night with Anne? Or maybe another chance to meet the mystery man? Sure, I replied evenly, forcing a smile. What kind of project? Oh, just some redecorating. She's hopeless with color schemes. Susie's laugh sounded genuine, but her eyes darted away as she said it. I wanted to scream, liar, but I stayed quiet. I needed to know more before I made any move. If I confronted her now, I'd look paranoid. And if I was wrong, God, I hoped I was wrong. I might destroy everything. When she left that afternoon, I made up my mind. I called a buddy of mine, Ryan, a tech genius who owed me a favor from back when I helped him move. Hey man, I need your help, I said, trying to sound casual. You know how you're always talking about those GPS trackers? Think I could borrow one? Ryan didn't ask too many questions, which I appreciated. By the time Susie got home that evening, her car was equipped with the tracker, discreetly tucked beneath the bumper. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was outweighed by the desperation to uncover the truth. For the next week, I tracked her movements like a detective. Most of her stops were innocuous. Grocery stores, daycare, Anne's house. But Friday evening brought a red flag. She didn't go to Anne's like she said she would. Instead, her car parked outside a swanky rooftop bar downtown. My chest tightened as I stared at the blinking on my phone's screen. I couldn't sit by anymore. I had to see it for myself. I told the boys we'd have a movie night and called my mom to babysit at the last minute. Something came up at work? I lied, hating myself as I kissed their little foreheads and promised to be back soon. By the time I got to the bar, Susie was already inside. Through the tall glass windows, I spotted her sitting at a table near the back, laughing with the same guy from the bistro. She looked radiant, her hair swept back and her smile wide. It wasn't the kind of smile she gave me anymore. I didn't go inside. Couldn't. Instead, I parked across the street, my heart pounding as I watched them. They seemed at ease, leaning closer as the night wore on. At one point, he reached across the table and touched her hand. She didn't pull away. It felt like an out-of-body experience. The life I thought I had, the loving wife, the happy family, shattered into shards I couldn't piece back together. I stayed until they left, watching as they walked to his car together. They didn't kiss, but the way she lingered by his door, her hand on his arm, said more than words ever could. When I got home, I couldn't even look at her. She was already in bed, her back turned to me. I lay down beside her, the weight of what I'd seen pressing me into the mattress. My mind raced with questions. Who was this guy? How long had this been going on? And why? What was missing in our marriage that she'd gone looking for somewhere else? The next day, I decided to confront her, or at least try. Over breakfast, I put my coffee down harder than I intended. So, how was Anne's last night? I asked, keeping my voice casual. Susie froze for the briefest second before answering. Oh, it was fine. She's still trying to decide on curtains. She didn't meet my eyes. I stared at her, willing her to tell me the truth, but she just sipped her coffee, acting like everything was fine. The lies hung between us like a wall, and I realized that the woman sitting across from me wasn't the same person I'd married. Or maybe she was, and I just never really knew her. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The weekend dragged on, each moment more suffocating than the last. I couldn't shake the image of Susie at the rooftop bar, her laughter and warmth reserved for someone else. Every time I saw her smile at the boys, I wondered if that same smile had been meant for me once. Sunday evening, I decided I needed to do something drastic. Watching wasn't enough anymore. I had to know who this man was and how deep her betrayal ran. After dinner, while Susie was giving the boys their bath, I slipped into her home office. Her phone was locked, of course, but her laptop sat on the desk, open and inviting. My hands shook as I powered it on. This wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but I was past caring about boundaries or trust. I started with her emails. Most of it was mundane, work correspondences, PDA reminders, but then I found a thread marked urgent in her sent folder. It was to Anne. My heart raced as I opened it. Last night went perfectly. He's definitely warming up to me, but I think he needs a little more encouragement. What's your schedule like this week? Maybe you can come with us next time. Make it feel more natural. Let me know what you think. My breath caught in my throat. Who was warming up to her? Was this about the man I'd seen? And why did Anne need to be involved? I clicked through more emails, but they were careful not to name him directly. Still, the tone was unmistakable. This was more than just a professional connection or a new friendship. Every word felt like a nail in the coffin of our marriage. Then I made a mistake. In my frantic clicking, I accidentally opened one of the family photo folders she kept on her desktop. It opened to a grid of pictures. Vacations, birthdays, lazy Sundays in the backyard. Our life stared back at me, whole and happy, mocking the cracks I now couldn't ignore. I slammed the laptop shut, my chest heaving with suppressed rage. When Susie came downstairs later, she found me staring blankly at the TV, gripping the remote so tightly my knuckles were white. "You okay?" she asked, her voice light but probing. "Yeah," I muttered. "Just tired." She didn't push, just kissed me on the cheek and headed to bed. For a moment, I felt like the most insignificant man in the world. How could she be so casual when my world was falling apart? The next morning, I made a decision. I needed to meet this man face to face. I called Ryan again, asking if he could help me track the GPS in real time. He hesitated but eventually agreed, his voice laced with concern. You sure about this, man? He asked. This could go south fast. I have to know, I said simply. That afternoon, Susie told me she'd be running errands after work. My heart sank as I watched her pull out of the driveway, her bright smile waving me off like nothing was wrong. I checked my phone, the tracking app showing her heading downtown again. It was the same rooftop bar. This time, I didn't stay in the car. I parked a block away, straightened my shirt, and walked in. The hostess greeted me with a smile, but I waved her off. My eyes scanned the room, and there they were. Susie sat across from him at a corner table, leaning in close as he spoke. He gestured with his hands, animated, and she laughed that laugh, the one I used to think was just for me. I approached quietly, not wanting to cause a scene. The man looked up first, his face tightening as he saw me. Susie followed his gaze, and her expression froze. "Hey," I said, my voice calm despite the storm inside me. "Mind if I join you?" Susie stammered something unintelligible, but I didn't give her the chance to finish. I pulled out a chair and sat down, folding my hands on the table. "Hi," the man said awkwardly, his voice lower than I expected. He was calm, almost too calm, and it infuriated me. "I'm Elliot." "Elliot?" I repeated, the name feeling foreign in my mouth. I turned to Susie. "So this is the guy? The one you've been spending all these late nights with?" She looked like a deer caught in headlights. "It's not what you think." "Really? Then explain it to me," I said, my voice rising slightly. "Explain what you're doing here." Laughing and leaning into this guy like he's your husband. Elliot shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. "Maybe I should go."
No, isnapat.
"You stay. I want to hear this from both of you." Susie reached across the table, but I pulled my hand back. "It's not an affair," she said quickly. "We're working on something important." "What? A screenplay? A startup?" "Don't insult me, Susie." Elliot finally spoke. "It's not like that," he said, his voice measured. "Susie's been helping me with my blog. I write about relationships, personal stories, advice, and she's been a huge part of that lately." I stared at him, disbelief coursing through me. "Your blog? That's the best you've got." Susie reached for me again, her voice desperate. "I didn't tell you because I knew you'd misunderstand. Elliot's just a friend. Nothing's happened." I stood abruptly, my chair scraping against the floor. "You're right. Nothing's happened yet. But let's be clear. You're on the edge of ruining everything, Susie. And I won't be the idiot who stands by and watches it happen." I walked out before either of them could respond, my pulse hammering as I hit the street. The truth was murkier than ever, but one thing was clear. Susie was slipping away, and she might not even care enough to stop. The drive home felt endless, every mile stretching into an eternity. My hands gripped the wheel so tightly they ached. Susie's excuses and Elliot's calm demeanor echoed in my mind, twisting the knife of doubt deeper. A blog? Was that their grand alibi? It was absurd, but the way Susie had looked at him, warm, open, was anything but professional. When I got home, the house was quiet. The boys were playing upstairs, their laughter faint but reassuring. My mom had left a note on the counter. "Kids were angels. Call me if you need anything. Love, Mom." I stared at it for a long moment, feeling a pang of guilt. I was so wrapped up in this mess, I'd barely thought about how it was affecting them. An hour later, Susie walked in. She paused when she saw me sitting at the kitchen table, a cold beer in hand. Her face was flushed, her steps tentative. She placed her bag on the counter, but before she could say a word, I held up my hand. "Don't," I said, my voice low but firm. "Don't insult me with more lies." She flinched, her shoulders sagging. "I'm not lying, okay? I know how this looks, but you have to believe me. Nothing's happened." "Nothing's happened yet," I corrected, echoing my own words from the bar. "But you're close, Susie. So close it's disgusting." Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel sorry for her. "Not yet. I wanted to tell you," she said softly, "about Elliot, about the blog. But I was scared you'd overreact." Overreact. I laughed bitterly. You've been sneaking around for weeks, lying about where you've been, and spending time with another man. I think my reaction is pretty tame. It's not like that, she insisted, her voice trembling. Elliot's going through a tough time. His wife left him, and he's been pouring everything into his blog. He asked for my help, and I thought I could make a difference. And that required late-night meetings at rooftop bars? I shot back. Or how about the text from men? You nailed it, babe. He's hooked. Care to explain that? Her face drained of color. She opened her mouth to respond but hesitated, as if weighing her words carefully. And didn't mean it like that, she said finally. She was talking about Elliot's confidence. He's been struggling to connect with his audience, and we've been helping him open up. I stared at her, the sincerity in her voice warring with the mountain of doubt I'd built. You're asking me to believe that all of this, your late nights, your lies, your secrecy, is just about helping some guy write blog posts? Yes, she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. I know it sounds crazy, but it's the truth. For a moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to let her tears wash away my anger, to hold her and pretend none of this was real. But the memory of her hand brushing Elliot's lingered, sharp and raw. I don't know if I can trust you, I said finally, my voice breaking. You've hidden too much, Susie. And for what? A blog? A man you barely know? I was wrong, she admitted, her voice shaking. I should have told you from the start. I let things get out of hand, but I swear I haven't crossed any lines. I stood, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. Here's the thing, Susie. Even if you haven't crossed those lines yet, you've been tiptoeing right up to them. And that's almost worse. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing there in silence. Upstairs, I checked on the boys, who were fast asleep. Their innocence felt like a cruel contrast to the turmoil downstairs. Lying in bed later, I couldn't sleep. Susie was in the guest room, the weight of her absence heavy in the quiet house. My mind replayed every moment of the past weeks, trying to piece together a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. The next morning, I called Ryan again. I need another favor, I said grimly. What now? He asked, his tone hesitant. I need you to hack something for me. Susie's emails, maybe her phone. I need to know the truth. Man, are you sure? That's a serious line to cross. She's already crossed hers, I replied. Ryan sighed but agreed, and by the afternoon, I had access to everything. Her texts with and confirmed what I already knew. They'd been orchestrating this charade together. But there was something else, buried deep in a chain of deleted messages. I think he's ready to take the next step. Can we meet tomorrow? I'll make up an excuse for Mike. It wasn't Elliot's name. It was someone else. Mike. Who the hell was Mike? And just like that, the narrative shifted. It wasn't just Elliot. There was someone else in the picture, another player in this twisted game. My heart sank as I realized the truth. I wasn't even close to uncovering the full extent of Susie's betrayal. Mike! The name churned in my head like a toxin, making me restless, nauseous. Whoever this guy was, he had been hidden in the shadows, obscured by Elliot and Anne's convenient distraction. It was one thing to suspect my wife of teetering on the edge of betrayal, but this felt calculated. Ryan's access to Susie's emails became my lifeline. Each evening, while she was busy with the boys or retreating to the guest room, I pored over her messages, piecing together fragments of conversations that hinted at a deeper deception. Most were innocuous work schedules, PDA reminders, but then there were the cryptic ones, full of inside jokes and vague references that felt like private codes. One thread stood out. It was marked as deleted but hadn't been fully erased. The subject line read, Wednesday plans, confirmed. The sender? An email I didn't recognize. mikeandmore@gmail.com. I clicked it open, my pulse hammering. Susie, can't wait to see you again. Let me know if Elliot or Anne need anything beforehand. I'll handle the venue arrangements. Same spot as last time? The lighting there makes you glow. The lighting makes you glow? My hands clenched into fists as I stared at the screen. This wasn't just professional. It wasn't just friendly. There was an intimacy here, a subtext that spoke of familiarity, of something deeper. And then Susie's reply, looking forward to it. I'll bring the mock-ups, but Elliot might need more time with the speech. We'll figure it out. Thanks for everything, Mike. She signed off with a smiley face emoji. Felt like a sucker punch. Not because it confirmed anything outright, but because it added another layer to the growing maze of half-truths and unanswered questions. Who the hell was Mike? And how did he fit into all of this? The next step was obvious, though I hated myself for even considering it. I needed to see this for myself. No more tracking apps, no more emails. I had to be there in the flesh to confront the truth. That Wednesday, Susie made the same excuse she always did. She'd be working late, helping and with some last-minute projects. I nodded numbly, pretending to buy into her facade. Don't wait up, she said, kissing the boys goodbye and offering me a faint smile. I won't, I replied, my voice colder than I intended. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I sprang into action. I grabbed my jacket, the keys, and my phone, where Ryan had already fed me the GPS coordinates from the tracker. This time, it wasn't the rooftop bar. Her destination was an upscale art gallery in the city, one I remembered from a date years ago. It had been her idea back then, a way to reconnect after a rough patch. I parked across the street and watched her car pull up. She stepped out, looking polished in a navy dress I hadn't seen before. My stomach churned as I realized she'd bought it recently, likely for nights like this. She wasn't alone for long. A black SUV pulled up moments later, and out stepped a man I assumed was Mike. He was tall, in his late 30s or early 40s, with a neatly trimmed beard and a confident stride. He greeted Susie with a warm hug, his hand lingering on her back just a little too long. I followed them inside, staying close enough to keep them in sight but far enough to avoid detection. The gallery was hosting a private event, a fundraiser of some sort. I hung back near the entrance, my heart pounding as I watched them mingle with the crowd. Mike was charismatic, his energy magnetic. People gravitated toward him, and Susie was no exception. She stood by his side, laughing at his jokes, nodding intently as he spoke. They looked like a couple, and the realization made my blood boil. But then something shifted. Elliot arrived. He joined them casually, greeting both with handshakes and a smile. The three of them formed a tight-knit group, talking in hushed tones that I couldn't make out over the low hum of the crowd. What was this? A business collaboration? Personal one? My frustration mounted as I tried to connect the dots. Then, as if fate had grown tired of my indecision, the answer came to me. I noticed Mike handing Susie a folder, her eyes scanning the contents before she nodded. They exchanged a few more words before Mike gave her a reassuring pat on the arm and walked away. I seized the opportunity. Susie had stepped aside to place the folder in her bag, leaving her momentarily alone. Hey, I said, my voice cutting through the ambient noise like a knife. She jumped, spinning around to face me. Her eyes widened in shock, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't decide what to say first. What are you doing here? She finally whispered, her voice tight. I could ask you the same thing, I replied, crossing my arms. But I already know the answer. Or at least I think I do. Her gaze darted to where Mike and Elliot stood, as if weighing whether to call them over. You're being ridiculous, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. Am I? I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Then explain it to me, Susie. Explain why you've been lying to me for weeks. Explain who Mike is and why he thinks you glow. Her face paled, her composure cracking. It's not what you think, she stammered. I swear, it's not. I've heard that before, I interrupted. But I'm done taking your word for it. If you don't tell me the truth right now, Susie, I'll find it myself. For a moment I thought she might confess. Her shoulders sagged, her lips parted as if to speak. But then, as if steeling herself, she straightened. I can't do this here, she said, glancing around nervously. Not now. I leaned in, my voice cold. Then you better believe we'll be doing it at home. Tonight. And with that, I turned and walked away, leaving her standing there, looking small and uncertain in the middle of the grand gallery. Whatever she was hiding, I would find it. I had to. I drove home in silence, my mind swirling with the confrontation. Susie's reaction had been telling. She wasn't just caught off guard. She was terrified. Terrified of what? That I'd ruined her plans for the night? That her carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling? By the time she walked through the door, it was nearly midnight. I was waiting in the living room, staring at nothing but the blank TV screen. She froze when she saw me, her bag clutched tightly in one hand. "You're still up," she said hesitantly. "Sit down," I said, my voice low. She hesitated, then walked to the couch and sat across from me. She looked tired, defeated even, but I wasn't ready to let her off the hook. "Start talking," I demanded. Susie sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's not what you think. Stop saying that," I snapped, cutting her off. "You keep telling me it's not what I think, but you won't tell me what it actually is. So either you explain everything, or I'm done listening." For a moment, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. Finally, she spoke. "Elliot's been working on a project. A book, actually, about relationships. He asked me to help because of everything I've shared with and over the years. He thinks I have a unique perspective." I raised an eyebrow. "And Mike? Where does he fit in?" "He's the publisher Elliot's been courting," she explained quickly. "Mike's been giving feedback on drafts, arranging venues for meetings, things like that. It's not like that. Okay? And Anne? She's been supportive. She thought it would be good for me to have something outside of the house, something I'm passionate about." I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed. It sounded plausible, too plausible. But it didn't explain the secrecy, the deleted emails, or the way she'd looked at Elliot. "Why the lies, then?" I pressed. "Why didn't you just tell me from the start?" She looked down, her fingers knotting together in her lap. "I didn't know how to," she admitted. "You've been so busy with work, with the boys, I didn't want to add more stress. And honestly, I wasn't sure how you'd take it. Do you even hear yourself?" I said, my voice rising. "You didn't want to add stress, so you lied to me for weeks? You didn't think I'd notice the late nights, the weird behavior?" "I was wrong," she whispered, tears brimming in her eyes. "I should have told you. But it's not what you think, I swear." The anger boiling in my chest threatened to spill over, but I held it in check. "I want to believe you, Susie," I said finally. "I really do. But you've given me no reason to trust you." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "What can I do to fix this?" "Prove it," I said. "Prove to me that this isn't what it looks like." The next few days were tense. Susie went out of her way to be present, engaging with the boys, cooking elaborate dinners, and asking about my day. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all an act. I kept digging, combing through her emails and texts, searching for any clue that might confirm or dispel my doubts. Ryan called me late one evening. "Hey, I've got something," he said. "It's not a smoking gun, but it's weird." "What is it?" "There's a second phone," he said. "It's registered under her name but hasn't been used much. Just a few calls and texts to numbers I don't recognize. One of them is Mike's." My stomach dropped. "A second phone? Where did she keep it?" "Don't know. But I thought you should know." The information gnawed at me, adding another layer to the already tangled mess. That night, while Susie was in the shower, I searched the house. It took me an hour, but eventually, I found it tucked inside a shoebox in the back of her closet. My hands trembled as I powered it on. The wallpaper was a generic stock image, and the apps were minimal. But the text messages were enough to confirm my worst fears. "Mike, can't wait to see you again. Let me know if you want to meet after. Susie, I'll see what I can do. It's tricky with the boys, but I'll make it work." The most recent message hit like a sledgehammer. "Mike, you don't have to keep lying to him, you know? Just say the word, and we can figure this out together." I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. My suspicions were no longer just suspicions. The lies had spiraled into something undeniable. When Susie came out of the bathroom, I was waiting with the phone in my hand. Her eyes widened as she saw it, and she froze mid-step. "Care to explain this?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. Her face crumpled, and she sank into the chair, burying her face in her hands. "I didn't mean for it to get this far," she said, her voice muffled. "Get what this far?" I demanded. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been playing me for a fool." "It's not an affair," she cried, looking up at me with tear-streaked cheeks. "I swear it's not." "Then what is it, Susie?" I shouted, finally losing my composure. "What the hell is going on?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of guilt and desperation. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know how to explain it." And just like that, the last shred of my patience snapped. "Then figure it out," I said coldly, "because I'm done playing this game." I stormed out of the room, slamming the door behind me. Whatever was happening, I knew one thing for certain. Susie wasn't the woman I thought I married, and I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to look at her the same way again. I barely slept that night. My mind raced with possibilities, questions, and the lingering sting of betrayal. The second phone sat on the kitchen counter like a ticking time bomb. I hadn't unlocked everything on it. There were apps and emails I hadn't explored yet, but I needed space from the suffocating weight of it all. Susie didn't come out of the guest room the next morning. The boys asked where she was, their innocent faces cutting through my anger like a blade. "Mom's not feeling well," I said, forcing a smile. "She'll be out soon." It was a lie, but at this point, lies felt like the currency of our household. By the afternoon, Susie emerged, her face pale and puffy from crying. She found me in the living room, scrolling through work emails I wasn't really reading. For a moment, she just stood there, as if summoning the courage to speak. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. I gestured to the chair across from me. "Go ahead." She sat down, clasping her hands together in her lap. "I've made mistakes," she began, her voice trembling. "I've kept things from you that I shouldn't have. But I need you to believe me when I say that nothing physical has happened." "Nothing." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "That's supposed to make it better? You've been sneaking around, lying to me, and texting another man about making things work. How am I supposed to believe this hasn't crossed the line?" Tears welled in her eyes again, but I didn't care. I was too angry, too raw. "Mike isn't what you think," she insisted. He's someone who listens, someone who understands." My stomach churned. "So that's what this is? You needed someone to understand you, and instead of talking to your husband, you ran to him? You don't listen to me anymore," she shot back, her voice rising. "You're so wrapped up in work, in the boys, in everything else. I've felt invisible for years, and when I finally found someone who paid attention to me, I didn't know how to stop." Her words hit harder than I expected. A small part of me wanted to deny it, to defend myself, but another part knew there was some truth to what she said. Our lives had become a routine: work, kids, dinner, bed. The spark that once connected us had dimmed, and I hadn't done much to reignite it. But that didn't excuse what she'd done. "So this is my fault?" I asked, my voice sharp. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It's not your fault. It's mine. I made a mess of everything, and I don't know how to fix it." I stood, unable to sit still any longer. "You're damn right it's your mess," I snapped. "And you're going to fix it, starting with cutting Mike out of your life completely." She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up a hand.
No excuses, Susie.
"If you want any chance of fixing this marriage, he's gone. Non negotiable." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll tell him it's over." That evening, I kept a close eye on her. She sat at the dining room table, her phone in hand, typing what I assumed was the message to Mike. When she finished, she set the phone down and looked at me. "It's done," she said. I took the phone from her and scrolled through the messages. Her text to Mike was clear and to the point. "This has to end. I can't do this anymore. Please don't contact me again. For a brief moment, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe this was the first step toward repairing what was broken. But then another thought crept in. Was this all an act? A way to placate me while she kept her secrets buried deeper? I decided I couldn't take her word for it anymore. The next day I called Ryan again. I need one last favor, I said. You've said that before, he replied dryly. I mean it this time, I said. I need you to monitor her second phone. If Mike tries to contact her again, or if she contacts him, I want to know. Ryan hesitated. You sure you want to go down this road, man? It might not end the way you want. It's not about what I want, I said bitterly. It's about the truth. He agreed, though reluctantly, and set up the monitoring within the hour. I felt a pang of guilt for invading Susie's privacy like this, but I pushed it aside. After everything she'd done, I didn't owe her the benefit of the doubt. 2 days later, Ryan called me with an update. You were right to be suspicious, he said. My heart sank. What is it? She's been messaging Mike through a different app, one that wasn't installed on her main phone. They're still talking. The ground felt like it shifted beneath me. I clenched my fist, trying to steady my breathing. What's she saying? Mostly just apologies and regrets, Ryan said. But there's one message that stands out. She said she'd meet him in person to talk things through. Tonight. My blood ran cold. Where? Ryan gave me the location. An upscale coffee shop on the other side of town. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. Susie had lied to me again, despite her tearful promises and apologies. Whatever trust one had left was gone, replaced by a simmering rage that threatened to consume me. This time, there would be no confrontation, no second chances. If Susie wanted to meet Mike, I'd make sure she didn't forget the consequences. I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. Tonight, I'd put an end to this charade once and for all. I parked a block away from the coffee shop, my hands gripping the steering wheel as I stared at the glowing sign in the distance. The place was upscale, quiet, the kind of spot where people had private conversations away from prying eyes. Fitting. I checked my phone. It was 7:15 p.m., 15 minutes past the time Ryan said they were supposed to meet. If Susie was in there with Mike, I hadn't yet seen either of them go in. The waiting gnawed at me, but I wasn't about to storm in without being sure. At 7:25, her car pulled into the parking lot. My stomach twisted as she stepped out, wearing a cardigan I'd bought her for Christmas last year. She hesitated by the door, checking her reflection in the window before heading inside. I waited 5 more minutes before leaving my car. The cool night air did little to calm the fire burning in my chest as I crossed the street. I pulled my baseball cap low over my face, hoping to blend in with the crowd. Inside, the smell of coffee and baked goods was thick in the air. The place was busy enough to provide cover, but quiet enough that conversations carried easily. I scanned the room and spotted her in the back corner, sitting across from a man who had to be Mike. He looked just like I remembered from the gallery, sharp, polished, and entirely too comfortable around my wife. He leaned forward as he spoke, his body language open and confident. Susie was more reserved, her arms crossed and her posture tense, but her eyes never left his face. I ordered a coffee I didn't want and took a seat at a nearby table, just out of their line of sight. My hands shook as I stirred sugar into the cup, my ears straining to catch snippets of their conversation. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this, Susie was saying, her voice low but clear. You don't have to, Mike replied smoothly. I meant what I said. You deserve better than this. Better? Better than what? I clenched my fists under the table, my nails digging into my palms. I can't just leave, she said. It's not that simple. Why not? Mike pressed. What are you holding on to? A husband who doesn't see you, who doesn't appreciate you. I felt the blood drain from my face. The audacity of this man, this stranger, presuming to know anything about our life, about me. I don't want to hurt anyone, Susie murmured, her voice cracking. You're hurting yourself by staying, Mike countered. I'm here for you, Susie. Whatever you decide, I'm here. The urge to confront them boiled over, but I forced myself to stay seated. I needed more. More confirmation. More proof of what exactly I was up against. As their conversation continued, Mike reached across the table, placing his hand over hers. She didn't pull away immediately, but after a moment, she withdrew, folding her hands in her lap. "I have to go," she said abruptly, standing up. Mike rose with her, looking concerned. "Susie, I can't do this," she interrupted, shaking her head. "I shouldn't have come." She grabbed her bag and walked toward the exit. Her pace hurried. Mike stood there for a moment, staring after her before sighing and sitting back down. I slipped out before she could see me, heading for my car and waiting for her to leave the parking lot. She didn't seem to notice me as she drove off, her face pale and drawn. When I got home, Susie was already there, standing in the kitchen with her back to me. She didn't turn around as I walked in, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. "How was your evening?" I asked, my voice cold. She flinched, her hands tightening on the counter. "Fine," she said after a pause. "Really?" I pressed, stepping closer. "Because I have a feeling you left something out." She turned to face me, her eyes red and glassy. "I went to see him," she admitted. "To end it." "End what exactly?" I demanded, my anger bubbling to the surface. "What was there to end if it was nothing like you've been saying?" "It wasn't an affair," she cried, her voice breaking. "I swear it wasn't. But I got in too deep, and I didn't know how to back out." I laughed bitterly. "Too deep? That's one way to put it." She stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached for me. "Please, you have to believe me. I was lost and he made me feel noticed. But I know it was wrong. That's why I ended it. I want to fix this. I want to fix us." I stared at her, my chest heaving with the weight of her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold onto the hope that this was salvageable. But another part of me, the part that had followed her, listened to her lies, and seen her with Mike, knew it wasn't that simple. "You don't just get to say you're sorry and make this go away," I said quietly. "Trust doesn't work like that, Susie. And right now, I don't know if I can ever trust you again." Her face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she sank into a chair. "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered. I don't want to lose you." I didn't respond. Instead, I turned and walked out of the room, leaving her to face the silence. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Susie's words echoed in my mind, but so did Mike's. "You deserve better." The question I couldn't escape was whether I still believed that about myself or her. The next morning, the tension in the house was unbearable. Susie busied herself with the boys, pouring cereal and packing lunches like it was any other day, but her eyes avoided mine at all costs. For once, I didn't care. I couldn't summon the energy to play the part of the doting husband or concerned father. Not after last night. I left for work earlier than usual, desperate for the distraction. But sitting at my desk, staring at spreadsheets, I couldn't focus. Susie's words haunted me. "I'll do whatever it takes." They felt desperate, hollow, like an echo of the woman I'd married but no longer recognized. By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I left the office and drove aimlessly, replaying every moment of the past few weeks. Her lies, the second phone, the meetings with Mike. It all pointed to something deeper, something she still hadn't fully admitted to. I found myself parked outside Ryan's apartment before I even realized where I was going. When he opened the door, he gave me a wary look. "You look like hell," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Because I'm living it?" I muttered, collapsing onto his couch. "What now?" Ryan asked, sitting across from me. "She says she ended it," I began. "But I don't know if I can believe her. And even if she did, what's left of us?" Ryan was silent for a moment, then leaned forward. "You need to figure out what you actually want," he said. "Do you want to fight for this marriage? Or are you done?" The question hit harder than I expected. I hadn't allowed myself to consider that possibility, not really. Despite everything, some part of me had clung to the idea of fixing this, of reclaiming the life we'd built. But now, faced with Ryan's bluntness, I wasn't so sure. If she's not willing to come completely clean, there's nothing to fix, I said finally. And if she's lying to me again, then you walk, Ryan finished for me. I nodded, the weight of the decision settling heavily on my shoulders. That evening, I came home prepared to confront Susie one last time. She was in the living room, reading to the boys, her voice soft and soothing. It was a picture of normalcy that felt almost cruel. When the boys were tucked in, I waited for her in the kitchen. She came in slowly, as if sensing the finality in the air. "We need to talk," I said. She nodded, sitting across from me. "I know. I didn't waste time. Tell me everything. No excuses, no half-truths. If there's anything left, I want to hear it now." Her hands fidgeted in her lap, her eyes glistening with tears. "I've told you everything," she whispered. "I swear. It wasn't an affair. It was stupid and selfish, but it never went further than feelings." "Feelings," I repeated bitterly. "For him." She nodded, and her tears spilled over. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I don't even know how it started. I felt invisible, and he made me feel like I mattered. And I didn't?" I asked, my voice breaking. Her sobs came harder now, but she didn't answer. I stood, unable to sit there any longer. "You've made your choices, Susie. Now I have to make mine." Her head shot up, panic flooding her face. "Please," she pleaded, "don't give up on us. I'll go to counseling. I'll do anything. Just don't leave." I stared at her, the woman I once thought I'd grow old with, and realized I didn't recognize her anymore. "I don't know if I can stay," I said quietly. "I don't know if there's enough left to save." And with that, I walked out, leaving her sobbing at the kitchen table. For the first time, I truly felt the weight of what we'd lost, and what we might never get back. I spent the next few nights at a motel, the kind of place with flickering neon signs and threadbare curtains. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me away from the house, from Susie's tearful apologies and the boys' innocent questions. "Where's Daddy?" they must have asked. The thought twisted the knife in my chest, but I couldn't face them. Not yet. The truth was, I didn't know how to come back. Susie's confession, as much as it hurt, wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing how far we'd drifted. Her betrayal had opened my eyes to cracks I hadn't wanted to see, fissures in our marriage that had grown deeper with every year of monotony and every moment of unspoken resentment. One evening, Ryan called to check in. "You can't stay in limbo forever," he said bluntly. "You need to make a decision, for yourself, for your kids." He was right, of course. I couldn't keep running, but going back felt just as impossible. The next morning, I drove back to the house. It was early, the sun just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the lawn. The house was quiet when I let myself in, my steps heavy on the familiar floors. Susie was in the kitchen, still in her pajamas, her hair tied back messily. She froze when she saw me, her eyes widening with a mix of hope and fear. "You're home," she said softly. "For now," I replied, my voice flat. She gestured to the table. "Can we talk?" I nodded, sitting across from her. She looked exhausted, as if she hadn't slept since I left. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, her voice trembling, "about everything, what I did, what I've been feeling. And I know I can't undo it. I know I hurt you." I stayed silent, letting her continue. "I don't expect forgiveness," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "But I want you to know that I'm committed to fixing this, to fixing us. I've already looked into counseling. I'll do whatever it takes." Her words hung in the air, earnest but fragile. Part of me wanted to believe her, to hold on to the hope that we could rebuild. But another part, the part that had seen her with Mike, that had lived through the lies and secrecy, wasn't so sure. "What about the boys?" I asked finally. "How do we protect them from this?" Her shoulders sagged, and she nodded. "I've thought about that too. They come first, no matter what. If you can't stay, I understand. But we need to find a way to co-parent, to make this as painless as possible for them." Her willingness to put the boys first stirred something in me. a flicker of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. I don't know what I want, I admitted. But I know I can't go back to the way things were. She nodded, tears spilling over. I understand, she whispered. For the rest of the day, we stayed civil for the boys, going through the motions of family life. But beneath the surface, the cracks remained, waiting for the final decision that would either heal or shatter us completely. The days that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Susie and I tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy for the boys, but every interaction between us felt strained, as if we were walking a tightrope over an abyss. At night, I slept in the guest room, unable to bring myself to share the bed we once called ours. I'd agreed to go to a counseling session, not out of hope but out of obligation. If there was even the faintest chance we could salvage something for the boys' sake, I needed to try. But sitting in that office, across from Susie and the counselor, felt like staring at the remnants of a burned-out building. Why do you want to save this marriage? The counselor asked, her gaze shifting between us. Susie spoke first, her voice breaking. Because I still love him. Because he's the father of my children. Because I know I messed up, but I want to fix it. The counselor nodded and turned to me. And you, Mark? Why are you here? I hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on me. Finally, I spoke. I'm here for my kids. I don't want them to grow up in a broken home. But as for this marriage, I don't know if there's anything left to save. Susie flinched, her tears falling freely now. But I couldn't soften the truth. The next few weeks were a blur of counseling sessions, tense conversations, and moments of quiet reflection. I tried to focus on the boys, on giving them the stability they deserved, but every time I looked at Susie, all I could see were the lies, the betrayal, the nights spent with someone else. One evening, after the boys were asleep, Susie found me in the guest room. She sat on the edge of the bed, her face pale and drawn. I can't keep doing this, she said quietly. What do you mean? This waiting, hoping, is killing me, and I know it's killing you too. I sat up, my chest tightening. What are you saying? She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. Maybe we need to let go. Maybe the kindest thing we can do, for each other, for the boys, is to stop trying to hold on to something that's already gone. Her words hit like a punch to the gut, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. You think this is what's best? She nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. I think it's the only way we can both start to heal. For a long moment, we sat in silence, the weight of the decision settling over us like a heavy blanket. Finally, I nodded. Maybe you're right, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The divorce was amicable as much as something like that could be. We agreed on shared custody of the boys, both of us determined to shield them from as much of the pain as possible. Susie moved into a small apartment nearby, and we worked out a schedule that allowed the boys to spend equal time with both of us. There were moments of bitterness, of course, arguments over paperwork, flashes of anger when old wounds were reopened, but we managed to keep things civil for the most part. In time, I found a strange kind of peace. The house was quieter, lonelier, but also free of the tension that had hung over us like a storm cloud. I focused on the boys, on rebuilding my life, on finding myself again outside the shadow of our broken marriage. And Susie? I don't know if she ever truly moved on, but I'd like to think she found her own peace. Whatever had drawn her to Mike, to the lies and secrecy, seemed to lose its hold after everything was said and done. We weren't the family we once were, but we were still a family. A fractured one, yes, but one that loved deeply despite the cracks. And maybe that was enough. For now, it had to be.